It was a quiet Tuesday evening in late October when the internet stopped scrolling. Not literally, of course, but close enough. Millions of phones buzzed at once, screens lighting up with a single tweet that seemed to come out of nowhere. No warning, no build-up. Just 5 words that sent shockwaves through newsrooms, political circles, and dinner tables across the country. Melania knew everything. Ask Trump, the account verified, blue checkmark gleaming like a warning light. Elon Musk. At first, people thought it was a hack, maybe a parody account that slipped through the cracks. But then came the follow-up, less than 10 minutes later, a short video clip, grainy but clear enough. It showed a dimly lit hallway inside what looked like a luxury hotel. A woman in a cream-colored coat, unmistakably Melania Trump, stood speaking quietly to a man in a dark suit. Her posture was stiff, her voice low but urgent. The audio was muffled, but one phrase cut through the static. Not again. He can't keep doing this. The camera panned slightly, catching the edge of a room number, 1218, and the logo of a well-known international hotel chain. Date stamp in the corner, June 2018. Right around the time of the G7 summit in Canada. Within an hour, Melania knew was trending worldwide. News anchors scrambled. Fact-checkers worked overtime. Conspiracy theorists spun wild theories. And somewhere in Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump reportedly threw his phone against the wall so hard it shattered into 3 pieces. But the real story didn't start with that tweet. It started months earlier, long before the world saw the clip, long before Musk got involved. It began with a quiet conversation between 2 people who never meant for anyone else to hear. Back in early spring, a former White House aide, someone who'd stayed on in a low-profile advisory role after the administration ended, was cleaning out old files. Among dusty binders and encrypted USB drives, they found something odd. A small unmarked audio recorder tucked inside a desk drawer in the East Wing. It wasn't standard issue. No serial number, no agency logo, just black plastic and a tiny red light that still blinked faintly when pressed. Curious, they plugged it into a secure laptop. What played back was less than 2 minutes of audio. Melania's voice, calm but strained, speaking to someone off mic. "If this gets out," she said, "it won't just hurt him. It'll destroy everything we've tried to protect." Then silence. Then a sigh so heavy it sounded like grief. The aide didn't know what this referred to, but they knew enough to be careful. They made a copy, locked the original in a safe, and told no one, not even their spouse. Weeks passed, then months. The recorder sat untouched, a secret buried under the noise of daily life. But secrets have a way of leaking. Somewhere along the line, maybe through a careless email, maybe a whispered conversation over drinks, the existence of that recording reached someone connected to Musk's inner circle. Not directly, nothing traceable. Just a rumor. There's something on Melania. From the White House days, real, damaging, but not in the way you think. Musk, known for his unpredictable curiosity and obsession with truth, started digging. He didn't care about gossip. He cared about systems, how power works, how information is controlled, how narratives are shaped. And this felt like a crack in the foundation. He reached out through back channels. Not with money, not with threats, just a simple offer. "Show me the truth. I'll protect your identity, and I'll make sure it's seen by the right people." The aide hesitated. For weeks, they thought about their family, their reputation, the potential fallout, but they also remembered the look on Melania's face during those final months in the White House. Distant, exhausted, like someone carrying a weight no one else could see. Maybe, just maybe, releasing this wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was mercy. So they sent the file. Musk listened to it 3 times. Then he called his head of security. "Find the video," he said. "There's footage to match this. It has to exist." What followed was a quiet, methodical search, no headlines, no fanfare. His team traced hotel security logs, cross-referenced travel records, followed digital breadcrumbs left by staff who'd been paid to stay silent. It took 6 weeks, but they found it. A backup copy of surveillance footage from that Canadian hotel, stored on a retired security guard's personal drive. The guard, now working odd jobs in Vancouver, had kept it just in case. He didn't know why. He just knew it felt important. Musk's team acquired it legally, through a non-disclosure agreement and a generous consulting fee. No coercion, no drama. Just cold, clean transaction, and then came the decision, release it or not. Musk wrestled with it. He wasn't a journalist. He wasn't an activist. He was a CEO with empires in space, cars, and social media. But he'd also built his brand on disruption, on tearing down walls between truth and illusion. And this felt like one of those walls. He didn't want to hurt Melania. In fact, the more he studied the footage and audio, the more he believed she was trying to contain damage, not cause it. The real target, if there was one, was the system that forced her into silence. So he crafted his tweet carefully. Not Melania did something wrong, but Melania knew everything. A subtle but critical difference. He was pointing not at her guilt, but at her awareness, and by extension at the man who kept her quiet. The moment he hit post, the world changed. In Washington, aides dropped their coffee mugs. In New York, editors canceled dinner plans and called emergency meetings. In Palm Beach, Secret Service agents tightened their perimeter around Mar-a-Lago. As Trump's voice boomed through the halls, "Who the hell does he think he is?" But the most telling reaction came not from Trump, but from Melania herself. She was at their New York apartment away from the Florida chaos when the tweet dropped. According to a close friend who spoke on condition of anonymity, she didn't scream, didn't cry. She just stared at her phone for a full minute, then placed it face down on the table and walked to the window. She stood there for nearly an hour, watching the city lights flicker below as if waiting for something to catch fire. She knew the footage would surface someday. She'd prepared for it. What she hadn't prepared for was Musk, the wild card, the billionaire with nothing to lose and everything to prove. Meanwhile, online, the debate exploded. Some called Musk a hero for exposing hidden truths. Others accused him of reckless grandstanding. Pundits argued over what everything even meant. Was it about business deals? Personal conduct? National security? No one knew for sure, and that uncertainty fueled the fire. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about Melania. It was about the silence that surrounds powerful women, the expectation that they stand beside their husbands, smile on cue, and never, ever speak out of turn. And now, thanks to a 15-second clip and a cryptic tweet, that silence had been broken. As night fell across the country, Trump finally broke his own silence, not with a statement, but with a live video posted directly to his social media platform. His face filled the screen, red-faced and intense, eyes narrowed like he was staring down a personal enemy. "Elon Musk," he began, voice trembling with rage, "has gone completely mad. This is a setup, a deepfake, a witch hunt by the fake news and their billionaire puppets. Melania is a loyal wife, a great first lady, and she would never, never be part of some backroom conspiracy against me." He paused, jaw clenched. "And let me tell you something. Nobody knows the truth better than me. I know things. Big things. And if Musk thinks he can play games with my family, he's got another thing coming." The video ended abruptly. No sign-off, just black screen. Within minutes, Musk replied, not with anger, but with eerie calm. "The footage is real. The audio is real. The truth doesn't care about your feelings." That exchange, raw, unfiltered, human, became the defining moment of the night. Not the conspiracy, not the scandal, but the collision of two titans, each convinced they were on the side of truth. And somewhere in the middle stood Melania, silent, watchful, and suddenly more visible than she'd been in years. No one knew what would happen next. Would Trump sue? Would Musk release more? Would Melania finally speak? The world held its breath, but one thing was certain. The story was just beginning. And the real explosion wasn't the tweet. It was the silence that followed. Because in that silence, people started asking questions they'd been too afraid to ask before. Like, what exactly did she know? And more importantly, why did it matter now? The morning after the tweet felt like the world was holding its breath. Coffee shops buzzed with hushed conversations. Office hallways filled with people glancing at phones, then quickly looking away when someone approached. Even schoolyards weren't immune. Kids mimicked their parents' confused frowns, repeating phrases like Melania knew everything, without understanding what it meant, only that it was serious. But behind closed doors, in rooms with drawn curtains and encrypted lines, the real work began. Melania didn't go to Mar-a-Lago. She stayed in New York, in the quiet penthouse the couple kept for city visits. She hadn't spoken to her husband since the live video aired. Not a text, not a call, just silence. And in that silence, she made a decision no one expected. She called her lawyer, not the flashy one who handled photo rights and brand deals, but the quiet, gray-haired woman who'd worked with her since her modeling days in Europe. The one who knew her real name before she became Mrs. Trump. The one who never gave interviews. "I need to tell my side," Melania said, voice steady. "Not through him, not through them, just me." Her lawyer didn't argue. She just nodded and started drafting a statement, not for the press, not for social media, but for a small group of trusted journalists. People known for fairness, not fireworks. It would be released only if things spiraled out of control. A safety net, not a spotlight. Meanwhile, in Austin, Elon Musk sat alone in his office long after midnight. The initial rush of posting the clip had faded, replaced by something heavier: doubt. He'd acted on instinct, on a belief that truth should never be buried, but now he saw the human cost. News outlets were digging into Melania's past, dragging up old rumors, twisting her silence into guilt. That wasn't justice. That was noise. He picked up the phone and called someone unexpected, a retired journalist who'd covered the White House for 40 years and never once printed a lie to sell a paper. "I might have made a mistake," Musk admitted, voice quieter than usual. "Maybe," the journalist replied, "but the footage is real. The question isn't whether it exists, it's why it matters." They talked for over an hour. By the end, Musk had a new plan. Not more leaks, not more drama, context. The next day, instead of another tweet, he posted a short thread, calm, factual, almost boring compared to the night before. He explained how the footage was obtained, legally, ethically, from a source who feared the truth would vanish forever. He clarified that the audio didn't accuse Melania of wrongdoing. It showed her trying to stop something she believed was wrong. He even included a time-stamped chain of custody for the video file, verified by a third-party digital forensics firm. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. Overnight, the tone of the conversation shifted. Pundits who'd been screaming scandal paused. Reporters started asking better questions. Was this about loyalty? About protection? About the quiet battles fought behind gilded doors? And then the first real clue emerged. A former Secret Service agent, retired, living quietly in Ohio, gave an anonymous interview to a respected news outlet. Not about the video, but about the days surrounding it. June 2018, the G7 summit. Tensions were high. World leaders were clashing. And inside the U.S. delegation's hotel wing, something unusual happened. There was a late-night meeting, the agent said, voice distorted for privacy. Not on the official schedule. Just 3 people, the former president, a foreign businessman with ties to multiple governments, and 1 aide. Melania showed up unannounced. She didn't knock. She just walked in, stood in the doorway, and said, "This ends tonight." Then she left. The agent paused. I've never seen him look that unsettled, like she'd seen something he thought was hidden. No names were given, no documents produced, but it fit. It explained the tension in the hallway footage. It explained why Melania sounded so weary, so resolved. Back in New York, Melania watched the interview on a muted TV while folding laundry. Her hands didn't shake, but her eyes stayed fixed on the screen long after the segment ended. She remembered that night vividly. The hushed voices behind the door, the smell of expensive cigars, the way her husband's face changed when he saw her, not angry but afraid. Afraid of what she might do, afraid of what she already knew. She hadn't recorded anything. She hadn't taken notes. But she'd made a choice that night to stay. Not for him, not for the cameras, but for her son, for the life they'd built, however fragile. She'd buried the truth deep, hoping it would stay buried. Now it was out, and she had to decide. Keep hiding or step into the light. Across the country, Trump's team was in damage control mode. Lawyers drafted cease and desist letters. Communication staff spun narratives about deep state traps and billionaire grudges. But privately, inside the Mar-a-Lago dining room turned war room, panic simmered, because they all knew, Trump included, that the footage was real, and that Melania hadn't lied. What scared them wasn't the video itself. It was what it represented, a crack in the armor. For years, the story had been simple. Loyal wife, powerful husband, united front. Now people were wondering, what if she wasn't loyal? What if she was just surviving? And worse, what if others knew more? Rumors began to swirl about other recordings. Other moments. A whispered conversation in Air Force One's hallway. A tense phone call overheard by a steward. Nothing confirmed, but enough to make Trump's inner circle nervous. He lashed out publicly, of course. Another live video, this time pacing like a caged animal. "She's being used," he shouted. "By Musk. By the media. By people who hate America." But his voice lacked its usual fire. There was something hollow underneath, the sound of a man realizing he might not control the story anymore. Melania saw that video too. And for the first time in years, she felt something unexpected. Pity, not for his anger. But for his fear, meanwhile, Musk stayed quiet. He canceled 2 public appearances, ignored interview requests. Instead, he spent hours reviewing old White House visitor logs, flight manifests, diplomatic cables released under FOIA requests. He wasn't chasing drama anymore. He was chasing patterns, and he found one. The foreign businessman from the G7 meeting. He'd visited Mar-a-Lago 3 times in the following year. Each time, large consulting fees appeared in shell companies linked to Trump Organization projects overseas. Nothing illegal on the surface, but the timing was convenient. Musk didn't release this, not yet. He sent it to a handful of investigative reporters with a simple note: follow the money. But protect her. He was learning. Truth wasn't just about exposure. It was about responsibility. Back in New York, Melania made her move. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't post a video. She simply walked out of her building one morning, sunglasses on, coat buttoned, and got into a black SUV with tinted windows. Cameras followed, of course, but she didn't flinch. She was heading to a small law office in Midtown, not her usual firm, but one specializing in privacy rights and whistleblower protections. Inside, she met with a woman who'd once worked for the Justice Department, known for taking on cases no one else would touch. They talked for 3 hours. When Melania left, she carried a single folder. Inside, a draft of a limited statement, a list of legal options, and a timeline of events only she could confirm. She wasn't going to expose everything. That wasn't her style. But she was done being a ghost in her own story. That evening, a short message appeared on her rarely used social media account, a platform she'd kept separate from politics, used only for her Be Best initiative. Just 2 sentences. The truth is rarely simple. But silence should never be mistaken for consent. No hashtags, no links. Just those words posted at 8:03 p.m. Within minutes, the internet exploded, not with speculation, but with respect. Even critics paused, because for the first time, Melania wasn't speaking as a wife, or a first lady, or a symbol. She was speaking as herself. Trump saw the post. He didn't rage this time. He just stared at his phone, silent for a long time. Then he turned it off and walked out to the golf course alone. Musk read it too. And for the first time since this began, he smiled. Not a triumphant smile, but a quiet one. Like someone who'd finally understood the point. The real story wasn't about secrets. It was about who gets to tell their own story, and who's been forced to stay quiet for too long. As night fell, reporters camped outside Melania's building. Lawyers prepared for fallout, and ordinary people sat at kitchen tables talking not about politics, but about trust, about marriage, about what it means to stand beside someone while your own voice disappears. No one knew what Part 3 would bring. Would Melania speak fully? Would Trump fight back harder? Would Musk release more? But one thing was clear. The explosion wasn't over. It was just changing shape. And this time the quietest voice might be the loudest of all. The days after Melania's quiet social media post felt different, less like a scandal unfolding and more like a slow, deep breath being taken by the whole country. People weren't just arguing anymore. They were listening. And that made all the difference. In New York, she stayed out of sight. No more public appearances, no interviews. But behind the scenes, something was shifting. Her legal team began quietly reaching out, not to news networks, but to historians, to archivists, to women's advocacy groups. Not for publicity, for perspective. She wanted to understand how her silence had been used, not just by her husband, but by the system around them. How her image, the calm, elegant First Lady, had become a shield for things she never agreed with. She started writing. Not for the public, just for herself. Pages and pages in a leather-bound notebook, filled with memories she'd locked away for years. The night in Brussels when she overheard a phone call about a payment that didn't make sense. The time a foreign diplomat handed her a sealed envelope, for the president's eyes only, and she saw the panic in her husband's face when he opened it. The way staff would suddenly go quiet when she entered a room, as if her presence erased their honesty. She wasn't collecting evidence. She was reclaiming her own mind. Meanwhile, in Washington, a small group of former White House staffers, none of them famous, none of them on cable news, began talking among themselves. Not in group chats or public forums, but over late-night phone calls and coffee in quiet diners. They'd all noticed the same thing. Melania had never been part of the inner circle. She attended events, smiled for photos, gave speeches written by others, but when real decisions were made, she was absent. Or worse, present but ignored. One of them, a mid-level scheduler who'd handled Melania's calendar for 2 years, finally broke her silence. Not to a reporter, but to a non-profit that documented workplace ethics in government. She tried to stop things, the woman said, voice trembling slightly. Not big political things, human things. Like when they wanted to cut funding for a children's hospital program, and she argued for hours behind closed doors. Or when a staffer was being bullied and she quietly moved them to a safer role. No one ever saw it. No one ever thanked her. That testimony, small as it was, began to change the narrative. People started asking, what if her silence wasn't agreement but survival? Back in Austin, Musk watched all of this unfold with growing clarity. He'd thought he was exposing a secret, but what he'd really done was give someone permission to speak on their own terms, and that was more powerful than any leak. He made a decision. No more videos. No more cryptic tweets. Instead, he quietly funded a digital archive, a secure public platform where verified documents, timelines, and first-hand accounts could be stored and accessed by journalists, researchers, and citizens. Not to accuse, to inform. He called it the record and the first entry. The hotel hallway footage, the audio clip, and a detailed explanation of how and why it was obtained. All time-stamped, verified, and stripped of speculation. It went live on a Thursday morning. No fanfare, just a link posted once, then left alone. Within hours, serious newsrooms began using it as a reference. Fact-checkers cited it. Professors assigned it in political science classes. For the first time, the story wasn't being driven by outrage. It was being studied. And then something unexpected happened. A retired diplomat from Eastern Europe reached out to a major newspaper. Not with a bombshell, but with context. He explained that the businessman seen in the G7 hotel that night had long been under investigation in 3 countries for using political connections to secure energy contracts. Nothing had ever stuck, too many layers, too much money. But the timing of his meetings with the former president? It lined up with stalled investigations and sudden policy shifts. Again, no smoking gun, but a pattern. And patterns tell stories. Trump's camp responded with fury, but it felt weaker this time. His usual rallies of supporters were quieter. Even his most loyal followers seemed confused. Why is she saying these things? One asked on a podcast, if she was so unhappy, why stay? It was a question no one in his inner circle could answer without sounding cruel. Behind the gates of Mar-a-Lago, tension grew thick. Staff whispered in corners. Longtime aides updated their resumes, and Trump himself grew more withdrawn, spending hours alone in his study, flipping through old photo albums, images of inaugurations, state dinners, family Christmases. In every picture, Melania stood beside him, perfectly dressed, perfectly still. But now, looking back, he saw something he'd ignored for years. The distance in her eyes. He tried calling her. Twice. She didn't answer. Not out of spite. Not out of drama. Just because she had nothing left to say to him that hadn't already been said in silence. In New York, Melania met with a documentary filmmaker, not the flashy kind, but someone known for quiet, intimate portraits of women in power. They talked for hours over tea in a sunlit room with no cameras, no recorders. Just 2 people speaking honestly. I don't want to destroy him, Melania said. I want to be free. The filmmaker nodded. Freedom isn't the absence of a cage. It's the right to tell your own story. That conversation became the seed of something new, not a tell-all book, not a revenge tour, but a limited, carefully curated project, a series of short films, each exploring a different moment from her time in the White House, told in her own words with her own visuals, no reenactments, no sensational music. Just truth as she remembered it. She wouldn't release it all at once. She'd let it unfold slowly, like turning pages in a diary. And the first episode? It would focus on that night in Canada. Not to accuse, but to explain. As word of the project leaked, not through tabloids, but through trusted sources in the arts community, public interest shifted again. This wasn't gossip. This was testimony. And people respected that. Even critics who'd mocked her for years began to soften. Maybe we were wrong about her, one columnist wrote. Maybe she wasn't complicit. Maybe she was just trapped. The phrase trapped sparked a wave of reflection. Women across the country shared their own stories of staying in jobs, marriages, situations where speaking up meant losing everything. Melania's experience became a mirror, not a spectacle, and through it all she remained calm. Not cold, not angry, just present. For the first time in decades, she was living as herself, not as a role. Musk, watching from afar, felt a strange sense of peace. He hadn't set out to start a movement. He just wanted the truth to exist in the open. And now it did, not as a weapon, but as a starting point for understanding. One evening, he received a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, no signature. Just 3 lines. You didn't give me a voice. You reminded me I still had one. Thank you. He didn't show it to anyone. He just folded it carefully and placed it in his desk drawer, the same one where he kept letters from engineers who'd built the first Tesla, from astronauts who'd flown on SpaceX rockets. Moments that mattered. This one mattered too. As the week ended, Trump made one last public attempt to control the story. He held a rally in Arizona, fiery as ever, calling the whole thing a billionaire's fantasy, and a betrayal by someone who should have been grateful. But the crowd's cheers felt forced. Cameras caught people checking their phones, whispering to each other. The energy was gone. That night, back at his hotel, he sat alone in the dark, staring at a photo of his family from 2005, before the presidency, before the fame, before the walls went up. In the picture, Melania is laughing, head tilted back, hand on his arm. He doesn't remember what she was laughing at. He wishes he did. In New York, Melania stood on her balcony, wrapped in a soft shawl, watching the city lights shimmer below. She wasn't thinking about him. She was thinking about tomorrow, about the first sentence of her film script, about the sound of her own voice recorded without filters, about the weight lifting from her chest with every word she chose to speak. The world was still watching. But for the first time, she didn't care what they thought. She cared what she knew, and she knew this. The truth wasn't a bomb. It was a key, and she'd just turned it in the lock. Part 3 wasn't about explosions anymore. It was about what grows after the dust settles, and in that quiet space, something real was finally beginning to bloom. The first episode of Melania's film dropped on a rainy Sunday morning. No press release, no countdown, just a quiet upload to a new, unassuming website with a simple name, As I Remember. The video was only 12 minutes long, but it felt like a lifetime. She didn't sit in front of a fancy backdrop or wear designer clothes. She wore a plain sweater, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She sat in a sunlit room with bookshelves behind her, real books, not props, and spoke directly to the camera like she was talking to one person, not millions. She didn't attack. She didn't accuse. She just told what happened. She described the G7 summit not as a political event but as a human moment. The exhaustion of constant travel. The pressure of representing a country while feeling invisible inside your own home. Then, the knock on the door late at night, her husband's aide asking her to stay in her suite. That's when she knew something was off. She followed the sound of voices down the hall. Saw the door slightly ajar. Heard enough to understand. A deal was being discussed. One that blurred the line between personal gain and national interest. Not illegal, maybe, but wrong. Deeply wrong. I didn't go in to confront him, she said, voice calm but firm. I went in to protect our son. Because if that kind of thing becomes normal, what world are we leaving him? She explained that the words caught on the hallway footage, "Not again. He can't keep doing this," weren't about politics. They were about pattern, about watching someone you love repeat the same mistakes over and over while the world cheers them on. "I stayed," she admitted, "not because I agreed, but because I believed I could influence from within, quietly, carefully. Maybe I was wrong, but at the time it felt like the only choice I had." The video ended with her looking straight into the lens. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for praise. I'm just asking to be seen as I am, not as a symbol, not as a wife, just..." Within an hour, the site crashed from traffic. Not from trolls or haters, but from people moved by her honesty. Teachers shared it with students. Therapists referenced it in sessions about boundaries. Women's groups hosted watch parties, followed by tearful discussions about staying silent to keep the peace. Even some of Trump's longtime supporters paused. One radio host who defended him for years said on air, "I never thought about what it must have been like for her, to stand there smiling, while everything inside you is breaking." In Mar-a-Lago, Trump watched the video alone. He didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. He just sat in his leather chair, hands folded, eyes fixed on the screen. When it ended, he turned it off and walked out to the garden. He stood there for nearly an hour, staring at the hibiscus bushes Melania had once planted. He hadn't noticed they were still blooming. Back in New York, Melania didn't check the comments. She didn't read the headlines. She went for a long walk in Central Park, hood up, hands in pockets, just another person in the crowd. For the first time in over a decade, no one recognized her, and she loved it. Meanwhile, the ripple effect spread further than anyone expected. A former White House photographer, who'd spent years capturing carefully staged moments of the first family, reached out to a museum curator. He offered a private collection, unseen photos of Melania taken during quiet moments no one was supposed to see. Her reading to her son in the Lincoln bedroom. Her staring out a window during a snowstorm wrapped in a blanket. Her laughing with a kitchen staff member over a burnt cookie. Real moments. Human ones. The museum agreed to display them in a small exhibit titled "The Woman Behind the Role." No commentary. No captions beyond dates and locations. Just images that showed a life lived in the shadows of power. People lined up for blocks to see it. At the same time, Musk made a surprising move. He didn't comment on the film. Instead, he announced a new initiative through his foundation. A grant program for women who've worked in high-pressure public roles, diplomats, advisors, spouses of leaders who want to document their experiences truthfully, without fear of retaliation. He called it the Unheard Archive. Applications poured in within days from former ambassadors, campaign managers, even a few military spouses. Not for fame, for legacy, for healing. And then came the most unexpected turn. A group of high school students in Ohio, inspired by Melania's film, started a classroom project. They interviewed their own mothers, grandmothers, aunts about times they stayed silent to keep the peace at work, in relationships, in families. They turned the stories into short audio pieces, played over simple piano music. They posted them online with the hashtag #DocACRemember. It went viral, not in a flashy way but in a deep one. Thousands of people shared their own stories, not about politics, about humanity. In the middle of all this, Trump's legal team sent a letter to Melania's lawyers. Not a threat, not a demand, just a request. Please clarify your intentions. We want to avoid unnecessary conflict. Her response was one sentence. My only intention is to live honestly. That was enough. Behind the scenes, a quiet separation began, not legal, not public, but emotional. Staff at Mar-a-Lago noticed Melania's belongings slowly disappearing from the guest wing. Her favorite chair, her books, her winter coat. No announcement. Just absence. Trump didn't stop it. Maybe he finally understood. You can't hold on to someone who's already gone. One evening, Elon Musk received a call, not from a lawyer, not from a reporter, but from Melania herself. It was brief. Less than 3 minutes, thank you, she said simply. Not for exposing anything. For giving me space to speak. He didn't say much in return. Just, you earned that space. Not me. They hung up. No follow-up. No grand gesture. Just two people acknowledging a moment that changed everything. As the week went on, the news cycle began to shift. New stories emerged about policy, about elections, about global events. But something had changed beneath the surface. People were more careful with how they talked about women in power. More willing to ask, what's her side? Instead of assuming loyalty or guilt, even late-night comedians softened their jokes. One host said on air, "Maybe the real story isn't who knew what, but who finally got to tell it." In New York, Melania started planning the second episode of her film series. This one would be about motherhood in the public eye, about shielding her child from a world that wanted to turn him into a symbol too. She filmed it in her kitchen, making pancakes, her son's laughter faintly heard in the background. No politics, just love, and that's what surprised everyone most. Her story wasn't about tearing down. It was about building up, herself, her truth, her future. Trump, for his part, gave a speech at a rally that weekend. He didn't mention Melania, not once. He talked about the economy, about borders, about pride, but halfway through he paused, looked down, then said quietly, "Family is complicated, but it's also everything." It was the closest he'd ever come to an apology, and maybe for now that was enough. As night fell across the country, millions of people scrolled past the usual noise, ads, memes, outrage clips, and paused on a simple image, the cover of Melania's film site. Just her name, no title, no drama, and beneath it a single line, "Truth doesn't need volume. It just needs to be heard." Part 4 wasn't about victory. It was about dignity, about the quiet courage it takes to say, "This is who I am," after years of being told who you should be. And in a world that loves explosions, sometimes the softest voice makes the loudest echo. The final episode of As I Remember wasn't announced. It just appeared one quiet morning in early December like the first snowfall, soft, unexpected, and covering everything in a new kind of silence. This time the video was longer, 23 minutes, but it moved slowly, like a conversation over tea with an old friend who finally decided to tell the whole truth. She sat in the same room, but the light was different, golden late afternoon sun spilling through the window. She looked tired but peaceful, not the polished image the world once knew, but someone who had walked through fire and come out the other side, not unscathed, but whole. "I'm not making this to hurt anyone," she began. "I'm making it because silence costs more than we think." She spoke about the years after the White House, how hard it was to rebuild a sense of self when the world still saw her as a role, not a person. How even her kindness was twisted into strategy, her quietness into complicity. "People assumed I had power because I stood next to power," she said. "But standing next to someone doesn't mean you share their choices. Sometimes it just means you're trying not to get crushed." Then she did something no one expected. She forgave, not in a grand, performative way, not with a hug or a photo op, but with honesty. "He made mistakes," she said of her husband. "Big ones. But he's also the father of my child." And in private moments, when the cameras were off, he showed love in the only way he knew how. Clumsy, loud, imperfect, but real. She didn't excuse what happened. She just refused to let anger define her story. "Holding on to rage is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die," she said, almost smiling. "I'm done drinking." The video ended not with a call to action, but with a question. What truth are you carrying that you're too afraid to speak? And what would happen if you finally let it out? Within hours, people began answering. A retired school principal in Iowa posted a letter she'd written but never sent to the school board that forced her to stay silent about budget cuts that hurt students. A veteran in Texas shared a voice memo about the guilt he carried for not speaking up when a fellow soldier was mistreated. A young woman in California uploaded a poem about staying in a job that drained her soul because she feared being labeled ungrateful. The hashtag #TalkMyTruthNow began trending, not as a political statement, but as a human one. In New York, Melania didn't watch the response. She was in her kitchen again, this time baking cookies with her son. Flour on the counter, music playing softly, laughter filling the room. No staff, no handlers, just them. She filmed a short clip, not for the public, but for herself, and saved it in a folder labeled Real Life. Meanwhile, in Florida, Trump sat alone in his study once more. But this time he didn't look at old photos. He picked up a pen and a legal pad, something he rarely did, and wrote a letter. Not to the press, not to his supporters, To his wife, it was short, just 3 paragraphs. He thanked her for their son. He admitted he hadn't always listened, and he wished her peace. He didn't send it. Maybe he knew words weren't enough, or maybe he just needed to say it, even if only to paper. He folded the letter and placed it in his desk drawer, the same one where he kept his son's first drawing, a ticket stub from their first baseball game together, and a dried flower from their wedding day. Things that mattered even if no one else saw them. Back in Austin, Elon Musk stood on the balcony of his office looking out at the Texas sky. His phone buzzed with notifications, congratulations, criticisms, interview requests. He ignored them all. Instead, he opened a private message from a woman he'd never met, a former White House florist who'd worked during Melania's time. She wrote, she used to rearrange the roses in the East Wing every Sunday, not because they were messy, because she liked making something beautiful even if no one noticed. Musk smiled. That was the real story, wasn't it? Not the scandals, not the secrets, but the small acts of care in a world that rewards noise over nurture. He closed his laptop and walked downstairs. He had a meeting about Mars colonization, but for once his mind was on Earth, on people, on the quiet courage it takes to live honestly in a world that demands performance. A few days later, Melania did something simple but powerful. She closed the As I Remember website. Not because she was done, but because the story didn't need to live online anymore. It had already spread. She turned the project over to a non-profit that preserves personal histories, ensuring the films would be archived for researchers, students, and anyone who needed to hear them, not as gossip, but as testimony. Then she disappeared from the public eye, not in hiding, but in living. She traveled with her son to Slovenia, to the village where she grew up, walked the same streets, visited her old school, sat with her mother in the garden, drinking tea like they used to, no cameras, no security, just home. People wondered if she'd ever return to public life. Some hoped she'd run for office. Others thought she'd write a book. But she had no plans. She was just free, and that was enough. As the year ended, news outlets did their usual top stories of the year roundups. Most included the initial tweet, the footage, the fallout. But the deeper take, the one that lingered, wasn't about Musk or Trump or even politics. It was about the moment a woman chose to speak on her own terms, and how that one act gave others permission to do the same. Schools began using her films in ethics classes. Therapists cited her journey in sessions about autonomy. Even corporate leaders started talking about Melania moments, times when someone stays silent not out of agreement, but out of survival. But the real legacy wasn't in headlines. It was in kitchens, in cars, in late-night texts between friends. It was in the woman who finally told her boss she deserved a raise. In the man who apologized to his daughter after years of distance. In the teenager who came out to their parents saying, "This is who I am." Because truth once spoken doesn't just change one life. It ripples. On New Year's Eve, as fireworks lit up cities around the world, Melania stood on a hill outside her childhood town, wrapped in a wool coat, watching the stars. Her son slept inside, tired from days of hiking and stories and simple joy. She didn't think about the past. She didn't worry about the future. She just breathed, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt no need to perform. Back in the US, Musk posted one final message, not on social media, but in a company-wide email to his teams. "Never underestimate the power of one honest voice," he wrote, "especially when it's been silent for too long." Then he turned off his phone and went to dinner with his kids. As for Trump, he gave a short speech at a private New Year's gathering. No politics, no rants, just a toast to family, to second chances, and to learning even when it's hard. It wasn't perfect, but it was human, and maybe that's what the whole story was really about. Not secrets exposed, but humanity reclaimed. The world moved on, as it always does. New scandals rose. New heroes fell. But something had shifted beneath the surface. People were a little kinder to the quiet ones, a little slower to judge, a little more willing to ask, "What's your side?" Because now they knew silence isn't always consent. And truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And that's when you have to lean in close to hear it, and when you do, you might just hear yourself.